This is a quick introduction to group and team process and dynamics models. The first one we'll look at is the phase model. Psychologist Bruce W. Tuckman is the guy who came up with the phase model of group dynamics, which you can find in just about every small group or team's communication textbook. It's the one that sounds like an Eminem song when you list the phases: forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. Of the first four phases, Tuckman said, they are all necessary and inevitable in order for a team to grow, face up to challenges, tackle problems, find solutions, plan work, and deliver results. The model is often misrepresented when folks say that groups always mature or progress through the sequence one stage at a time. Yes, on the surface, it does appear that many groups first define themselves as a group in some official way, forming, and that shortly thereafter they experience some sort of tension or conflict, storming, that generally leads to the establishment of rules and expectations, norming, before finally hitting their stride and tackling the task at hand, performing, and that when the task for which they formed in the first place is complete, they cease to be a group and adjourn. But it's honestly not that simple in reality. Very few small groups have sealed borders. People generally join and leave for a variety of reasons, and each new change or input causes some degree of sequence disruption. But for the sake of simplicity, let's cherry pick some scenarios from Ted Lasso, for example, that illustrate how the base Tuckman sequence works. In the first episode, Ted meets the squad, and we call this the forming stage. Over the course of the first couple of seasons, the clash between teammates Roy and Jamie can be labeled the storming phase. At some point along the way, the team comes together around the theme and symbolism of the believe sign Ted hung in the first episode, which we can call the norming phase. After that, they seem to become more of a team, more prepared to take on challenges, and they enter their performing phase. As anyone who's watched the show knows, it's really not that simple, but the model is a simple and straightforward way to create relatively large categories for group dynamics, which is why it's so popular. Now let's look at what we'll call a spiral model. B. Aubrey Fisher came along sometime later with a model for understanding how groups come to a consensus, claiming that consensus is reached in a four-phase sequence of orientation, conflict, emergence, and reinforcement. Building on the misreading of Tuckman's model, which again people claimed was a linear phase model when it actually wasn't a linear phase model, spiral models came along claiming that groups would cycle through the orientation, conflict, emergence, and reinforcement sequence over and over and over again. You see the cycle also represented in the fact that the spiral models don't include very clear forming or adjourning phases. I suppose that makes them more of a fit in terms of taxonomy for permanent groups like governmental bodies, where the players change more frequently, but the problems they need to deal with and the decisions they need to make persist or return in regular intervals. And another important aspect of B.A. Fisher's model is the reinforcement phase. This generally involves feelings of goodwill and support. So think of political messages of togetherness and shared purpose that are spread around after a contentious political decision-making process, like presidential election concession speeches. Most of them are generally pleasant. Some aren't. Or you can consider sports teams that have recurring seasons, trade deals, funding issues, and more, but they always have one key goal and purpose: to win. In Ted Lasso, for example, we see this happen each time a new player joins, leaves, or returns to the team. We can categorize all of the reasons why the change is made under orientation, the tensions and disruptions caused by the change under conflict, the outcomes and group effects of those changes and conflicts go under emergence, and the messages of assurance and support for what was done, how it turned out, and what comes next are categorized under reinforcement. Now let's look at punctuated equilibrium. Now this sounds fancy, but it's relatively simple as a concept. In the late 80s and early 90s, Connie Gersick put forward a new idea, observing that teams often progressed in a pattern of punctuated equilibrium through alternating inertia and revolution in terms of behavior, identity, and the way they approach their work. Basically, groups are kind of squishy and lazy and just coast until a temporal trigger of some sort, like a looming deadline, shakes them up and sparks a burst burst of activity and restructuring. Sticking with the politics example, we literally see this every election cycle. As election day approaches, political activities increase, campaigns begin to form and reform, strategies become more solidified, and sometimes people even freak out a little bit. Sometimes. It happens. You might also think about sports teams. As they near the midpoint of a regular season, you see all kinds of interesting activity. Those who are in the running for the playoffs might try to acquire certain players to fill in gaps revealed in the first half of the season. Those who are not in the running might shift their strategy to begin looking at plans for next season. Either way, the midpoint of a season is a punctuated moment that shakes them up and nudges them to take action to establish equilibrium. And when you zoom out and look at these dynamics over time, you see this pattern of peaks and valleys or ebbs and flows in the activity. Understanding these models, all of them, equips us to better orient ourselves to the nature of groups that we are a part of. Knowing what to expect at the fundamental level, being able to track and anticipate the trajectory and flow of group dynamics will help us perform and contribute more effectively in any group context. Now, which of these models you focus on most in an academic setting, in the academic work that you might produce, depends on which type of analysis you're trying to do or what type of argument you're trying to make. The focus and application will also be dictated by the type of artifact you're analyzing, the examples you're using, and even the complementary theories and concepts you already have in your tool belt. Thanks for listening.